If you're a board member, if you're a leader of a nonprofit organization, a foundation, church, school, university, faith-based or secular, I'm here today to provide you with a roadmap of how your organization's governance practices can drive missional success. Those organizations that embark down this path will be at a distinct advantage vis-a-vis their competitors who do not. So this is what I call the art of governance as a competitive advantage. I've been privileged to witness this governance dance from the perspective of a CEO, as a board member, as a consultant. Chaired the boards of a Fortune 500 company, an international missions organization, a charitable foundation. And being a board member is difficult. You're asked on a part-time, often unpaid basis to oversee an increasingly complex organization. Your employees, the clients, the donors, they expect you to get this right. Being a leader, being a CEO is also increasingly difficult these days. Daily you're faced with challenges such as a pandemic, inflationary pressures, recruiting and retaining talented staff, technology challenges, culture wars, just to name a few. You work in an environment where change is the only constant. And this new normal is challenging and complicating the way organizations are governed. Now, governance challenges aren't anything new. Mark Twain famously said, God made idiots. That was for practice. And then he made boards. Maybe more seriously, famed management guru Peter Drucker talks about how there's one thing all boards have in common, and that they do not function. And it's interesting to me because, what good CEOs crave is to have a strategic relationship and a partnership with their board of directors, which adds value to the organization. What good boards crave is to be able to effectively utilize their time and their knowledge to enhance the organization while they support their leadership team. And the question becomes, why is this so difficult? So, contrary to the advice of a number of consultants, there is no one uniform governance model that fits every organization. It may be a starting point, but it's never the end. The governance needs of a private university are different than a social services organization, are different than a foundation, are different than a school. Every organization has a unique culture, a unique history, a unique operating environment, regulatory constraints, and so by necessity requires a board governance model that fits its unique organization. Now, the question also becomes, with everything else on a leader's plate, on a board member's plate, why should they take this seriously, and why should they make board governance a priority? As I was researching and writing my book, The CEO and the Board, what fascinated me is that the research clearly demonstrates that effective board governance, coupled with a healthy CEO-board relationship, is a key predictor of organizational success. So let me repeat that. Effective board governance, coupled with a healthy board-CEO relationship, is a key predictor of organizational success. And embedded then within the effective governance piece are what I call the following non-negotiables. So one, there simply needs to be that trust, integrity, intentionality, and respect and openness between the board and the leadership team. Two, the organization must have and need a very focused and real reason and clear reason for existing. Three, the board and the CEO must intentionally and regularly engage in succession planning, both emergency as well as long-term. And then four, there must be a culture within that organization that holds both yourself as well as each other accountable, the board and the leadership team. A diverse group of relevant skill sets, perspectives, and experiences must sit around both the board and the leadership table. And then finally, an understanding that each organization is unique and that the board's governance practices must be tailored to the current unique situation of that organization. So given those non-negotiables, the question becomes, what issues or challenges might one face in implementing an effective governance structure? And I could put pretty much every issue or challenge into one of two buckets: plumbing or people. And so a plumbing roadblock is a structural or cultural impediment that over time actually becomes a competitive disadvantage. So one example might be antiquated bylaws or articles of incorporation, where 30 years ago they probably made a lot of sense. Today they can be a competitive hindrance. Another example would be, how is your board meeting structured and set up? What's fascinating to me is when you look at the board practices of an organization, most organizations look backwards 80 to 95% of their time together. So, they'll review last quarter's financial results. They'll have programmatic reports from various different leaders. They'll talk about the last quarter. They'll talk about the last year. One question to ask is, does your organization, does your board and leadership team spend about 50%, at least 50% of your time looking strategically forward, talking about the various different changes in the external environment, how it's going to impact your environment, how it's going to impact your organization? Another question to ask is, do you have that clarity of mission, that shared clarity of mission between the board and the leadership team? Similar to when, say, John F. Kennedy gave that famous speech where in 10 years we're going to place a man on the moon. So I can assure you that every employee at NASA knew his or her role in accomplishing that mission. About 7 years ago, when I was served as CEO, and now it's now called Upbring, we came to the realization that as a social service organization, we could no longer be all things to all people. We didn't have the financial capital. We simply didn't have the capacity in this changing world. And so because we had a healthy relationship between the board and the leadership team, we had some pretty frank and honest conversations. Okay, what can we be the best at? Where can we make the biggest impacts in the communities in which we serve? And so we came down to the decision that our mission was going to be to break the cycle of child abuse within the state of Texas. And having that clarity of mission allowed us to, one, reallocate resources, allowed us to sell retirement communities, to rebrand, to create new programs both in the social services space as well as in the education space, create a new research arm, create a new advocacy arm, create a new products innovation lab, and also to create a meta-leadership culture of partnership, knowing that we couldn't do this alone. Clarity of mission matters. Now, in the people bucket, one example would be, do you have the right skill sets and experiences sitting around your board and leadership table? So depending on the nuances of your organization, this could include ethnicity, age, gender, religion, skill sets, life experiences. It's interesting, there was a pretty famous study by McKinsey & Company, which is a management consulting firm, that demonstrates that companies with a diverse board of directors outperform those with more homogeneous boards of directors. The research is also clear that as you consider in terms of hiring for either your leadership team or your board of directors, the importance of emotional intelligence. So one question to ask is, when you're interviewing, say, for example, a prospective member of the board of directors, will this individual's emotional intelligence add or subtract to the collective emotional intelligence of the boards of directors? The other interesting thing that I think is really becoming more apparent as the world and our organizations become more complex is the need for specific skill sets and experiences on boards of directors. So I was asked to, as a consultant, to serve as a facilitator with an organization recently, and the CEO asked me to come in to lead a dialogue because they were considering a merger with another organization. And it quickly became apparent in the morning, both to myself and to the CEO, as well as to the members of the board, that they simply did not have the skill set sitting around that table to provide the CEO with any sort of sound advice. And so as we continue in our governance journey, questions that organizations need to wrestle with are, do we need somebody with technology experience, international business experience, finance, investments, specific skill sets, as well as life experience that can help drive the organization forward? Another people issue, and I put it in the people bucket because it's typically the hesitancy of boards or senior leadership teams to bring it up, is what we call the elephants in the room. And I would submit that every organization over time will have an elephant in the room that needs addressing. So it could be outdated technology, it could be antiquated bylaw, it could be new competition. Private school came with an issue recently to me, and their issue was that 4 blocks away, a charter school just opened. And so the students and the parents were wrestling with, do we continue to pay this tuition here at this wonderful school, or do we go to this charter school? And that was a very real elephant in the room that this local private school was dealing with. And the best-in-class boards will understand that there will always be elephants in the room, and will figure out a way to bring them out in the open and honestly, without blame, wrestle with those so that the organization can continue to move forward. Best-in-class boards also understand that there are different seasons in an organization's life, and there will be seasons when a board will necessarily need to lean in. So maybe at a time of crisis, or selecting the next CEO, or during a pandemic. There'll also be times when the board can maybe take a step back, and when the organization's continuing to run on all cylinders, the board can take that step back and then allow the staff to do what they need to do while continuing to fill their own fiduciary responsibilities. So the question becomes, if you're a leader, if you're a board member, how will you know that you have successfully implemented an effective governance practice? And I would submit by it is how you answer the following 8 questions. A scorecard, if you will, to determine whether or not your organization's governance practices are in fact a competitive advantage. So 1, is there a healthy, trusting relationship between the board and the leadership team? 2, is the CEO comfortable sharing everything with the board, or does the CEO tend to, quote, manage the board? 3, does the board and the CEO have this shared focus of strategically looking forward at least 50% of their time together into their future, continually planning for the future? 4, have the elephants in the room been identified and wrestled with in a blame-free, trust-filled environment? 5, does the board have the requisite collective skill sets, and is it appropriately diverse? 6, does the board and the CEO regularly, continually engage in proactive succession planning? 7, is there a shared, clearly defined strategy between the board and the leadership team that is effectively being implemented and appropriately measured? And then 8, does the CEO feel that they're being supported by the board? And does the board feel that they're being supported by the CEO? Serving as a leader, serving as a board member, it's not for the faint of heart. It's going to take all of your attention coupled with a strong dose of humility. And so the question becomes, why do we continue to serve? And from my perspective, if we want our social service organizations, our churches, our schools, our universities, our foundations to continue to add value to our communities, I don't think we have a choice. And so it's my prayer that all of us will continue in this solemn responsibility to create and implement effective governance practices that in fact come to pass. competitive advantages. Your employees, your clients, your communities are